Chapter 11 is looking at patterns of social mobility. And if you remember, social mobility is changing one's social position. It can certainly occur in a variety of ways. But first, I want to mention closed systems. Of course, this is societies in which positions in the stratification system are generally inherited and permanent, as we've already learned, and open systems where there is no formal or ideological barriers to mobility. And people rise or fall on the basis of their own abilities, efforts, and accomplishments. Some different types of mobility that you do need to be familiar with. Certainly it can be measured either within or between generations. There are two kinds of mobility that is within or between generations, and these are termed intra and intergenerational mobility. Make sure you know the difference between the two. Intra-generational mobility refers to one's chances of rising to or falling from one social class to another within one's own lifetime. In other words, we're talking about within a person's own career. And intragenerational mobility is usually measured by comparing the social class position of children with that of their parents. It is a change of social class from one generation to the next. For example, the son of a South Texas migratory worker becomes the Secretary of Education under President Bush. So that would certainly be an example of intragenerational mobility. Now, looking at the status attainment model, I want to say that the connection between social class, origin, and educational attainments and the factors that influence educational success. It looks at the link between social origins, educational attainments, and first job in the adult labor market, and it focuses on social origins, education, and first job, and how they're tied to employment later in a person's career. Some more types of mobility that you need to be able to identify. One is structural mobility. Structural mobility is movement due to expansion and contraction of the underlying economic system. Certainly we have what is known as upward mobility. This is a change to a higher status pattern of life. Unfortunately, not all mobility is upward. We do have downward mobility, which involves loss of economic and social standing. It is certainly a problem for families and individuals at all levels of the class structure in the United States and elsewhere. Horizontal mobility is a move from one job to another job of equal rank, and most Americans do move horizontally. There is a vicious cycle of poverty, which is the intergenerational transmission of poverty from parents to children. And then you need to know what cultural capital also is. This is familiarity with and a configuration of knowledge, attitudes, and social skills that place children at a distinct advantage in the social setting. Now, there are four general conclusions about social mobility in the United States. One is social mobility over the course of the last century has been fairly high. Mobility is certainly what we would expect in an industrial class system. Number two, the long-term trend in social mobility has been upward. Industrialization, which greatly expanded the United States economy, and the growth of white-collar work over the course of the 20th century has certainly boosted living standards. Number three, within a single generation, social mobility is usually small. Most young families increase their income over time. Furthermore, there are dips and bumps in a family's earning history, with almost half of United States families being in or near poverty and almost half of the United States being affluent or close to it at some point over a 25-year period. Yet the number of people who move from rags to riches or the other way around over their lives is quite small. For most families, certainly social mobility involves limited movement within one class level rather than dramatic moves between the classes. And then number 4, social mobility since the 1970s has been uneven. Real income that is certainly adjusted for inflation rose during the 20th century until the 1970s when it hit a plateau. And during the 1980s, real income remained stagnant for many people, rising again by the end of the 90s. But these trends mask the experiences of different categories of people.